where you reside, and welcome to the latest of the Centaurus education series. Today we are going to be covering upgrading to Cognos Analytics, what you need to know. All right, and I'd like to start off by reviewing our agenda today because it's a long one. We have a lot to cover. We're going to start with some quick introductions and then a few slides about Centaurus. We're going to talk about the prerequisites to moving to Cognos 11, such as database, operating system requirements, browser support, and then where you can find the latest info on that. We're going to cover a number of installation options that are now available. We will cover some tips and tricks around the gateway and web server support, and we'll discuss the companion and legacy tool status with V11. We have a few odds and ends that you should be thinking about and we're going to discuss how IBM is handling new releases to Cognos 11, and then focus on the latest and next planned release. And then finally we conclude with some additional resources and a live Q&A. So you can see we have a packed agenda today. My name is Jim Frazier. I'm the Vice President of Client Solutions here at Centaurus, and I have over 25 years of experience helping organizations with software and consulting solutions, and I'm joined today by Todd Schumann. Todd has over 15 years of Cognos experience. He heads up our infrastructure practice area, and as part of that practice area, Todd's team is responsible for the installation, upgrade, and performance tuning of many of our clients' Cognos environments. He lives with his wife and 2 daughters outside of Washington, D.C. in Virginia. So who is Centaurus? We are first and foremost a nationwide business analytics consulting firm, and this slide depicts a little bit about what we do for a living every day. We provide clarity from chaos out of complex business requirements, disparate data sources, and constantly moving targets. We've made a name for ourselves because of our strength in bridging the gap between IT and business users. We deliver solutions that give you access to reliable, analysis-ready data across the organization so that you can quickly get answers at the point of impact. Our consultants are top-notch experts. They all have pragmatic real-world experience or expertise and experience advancing the state-of-the-art. We're confident in our team and our methodology, and to that effect, we back our projects with a 100% money-back guarantee. And this slide just gives you a little flavor for our breadth, gives you a feel for the range of industries we've worked in. We've delivered thousands of successful projects for hundreds of clients from the Fortune 500 to the mid-market. We've solved business problems across many industries and functional areas, including the Office of Finance, Sales and Marketing, Manufacturing, Operations, HR, and IT, and even customer-facing or forward-facing analytics. If you need some help with your next analytics projects, we'd love the opportunity to leverage our expertise for you. And then we're going to start off with a quick poll here, just so we can read the audience today, and we'll share it with everyone as well. We'll share that shortly in terms of when you're considering migrating to Cognos Analytics. I noticed we didn't have an option up there for folks that have already done it. I think there's a few of them out there from our talkings with people at the recent conference, but oops. I don't see, oh, there it is. There's our poll results. So we've got about 20% thinking about it in the next 3 months. We seem to have pick up a lot of folks thinking about doing it before the end of the year. The next 4 to 6 months, 7 to 12, you can see the numbers pick up. A lot of folks need to create a dev environment, which is good. We have some nice things to talk to you about. And then there's a small amount that are saying maybe never. But I think that's a good poll there. And with that, I am going to hand things over to Todd to jump into the meat of the presentation today.
Okay, thanks, Jim. I'm going to talk about the prerequisites first, about what you need to take care of in order to actually install and run Cognos 11 Release 4. All this information we're going to look at today is available at the URL you see here, and this will be again provided via the chat window, and you can also get it from our website. You can also just basically search for Cognos 11.0.4 supported software, and you can get all the information about operating systems, hardware, and then requirements by platform, whether you're running Linux, Windows, etc. So the big four operating systems, I'd say we typically mostly focus on Windows, and then secondly Red Hat, Linux, but these are the versions that you can use that are supported for Cognos 11 Release 4 as of today. We typically recommend that you always try to get as current as possible. So upgrades are time-consuming and expensive. You want to, not have another piece of the puzzle get, out of support on you. So, if you're going to upgrade to Cognos 11, you probably don't want to do it on Windows Server 2008. I mean, you only have a couple more years left of that before that's going to be no longer supported by Microsoft. Get yourself on 2012. 2016 just came out a couple weeks ago, finally. No word on when that will be supported. I think it's probably too soon to expect it to be in Release 5, but I'm hoping to see Release 6. So depending on your timeline, keep checking this link and trying to see, what's available as far as operating systems. If you're going to do the upgrade, get as current as possible on a new server or VM. Databases, there's a little bit of a difference, and you kind of have to figure out what makes sense for you. But the content server, which is going to be the database that Cognos needs to maintain and stores information about Cognos, has more mature versions of the the three basic databases available to it. So SQL Server, if you're still running 2008. You're going to need to find a way to get a database up and running with at least 2012, preferably 2014, to house your content store. Earlier versions of Cognos 11, I think it was maybe Release 1 or 2, Oracle 11G R2 was not being supported as a content store database. They've since kind of gone back and added support for that. So if you're on Oracle, you're probably in better shape. There's still support for 11G. I do see a lot of people still on SQL Server 2008, and they're going to have to figure out, a best way to also do a database upgrade and get that available, at least just to house your content store. And then DB2, 10.1, 10.5, 11.1, there's lots of different versions. You can get the full list of that as well from the link that we had on the previous slide. You get a little more flexibility with the data source connections that you're actually pulling into your reports and reporting off of. So you can still hit the SQL Server 2008's Oracle, no difference there really. DB2, you can get some older versions, and that list is pretty massive. There's a ton of different data source connections you can have, just sort of focusing on these three. So if you have specific connections you're concerned about, definitely check that list, make sure you're compliant, and you'll be able to get your data. That said, you still might be able to connect to other ones outside those lists. It's just you're not going to be supported if anything goes wrong. So maybe test it, try it. You may have some functionality that doesn't work, but if you stick to that list, you should be in good shape. And then finally, the browsers. They've kind of pushed the browsers to the next generation. No more support for anything less than IE 11. Which has always kind of been the gold standard for Cognos if you wanted to access all the capabilities. It's nice to see that they finally added some additional browser support for Chrome, Firefox, Safari. One thing to note is some of those browsers don't have full support with the legacy tools, which we'll talk about later. Cognos 11 uses sort of a new user interface and new technologies that leverage, the current day browsers in a much more user-friendly format than they have in the past. So you'll be able to take advantage of all the new features and functionality with these browsers. However, if you're going to be running the old studios and the legacy companion tools, you'll notice Chrome, for example, won't allow you to open events. I think Analysis Studio and a couple other of the old legacy studios. So just be aware of that. If your users aren't going to be accessing that, may make sense to allow them to use those other non-IE browsers. But with IE, you'll be able to access everything, so if you're still using that, no problem there. The installation options. If you've been working on this in the sandbox and kind of working with it since it came out late December last year, you'll notice that it's changed a lot. Different options, different ways to install. With release 1, there was 3 options when you first ran the install. You had ready to run, expand, and custom. They changed those in release 2 and 3 and kind of consolidated it to an easy install and then a custom/expand. In release 4, it's changed again a bit. So now they've sort of packaged together a bunch of downloads that needed to be done separately. So the first thing you'll see is, do you want to install IBM Cognos Analytics, or do you want to install IBM Cognos Analytics tools? And essentially the tools is just the Lifecycle Manager tool, which has been completely redesigned, works much better than it has in the past. So if you've had a negative experience with that tool, from the Cognos 10 days, I would recommend checking out the new version. You don't even have to download it anymore separately. It's baked right into the server install now, and it will help you do a lot of benchmarking and validation against your old Cognos 10 or 8 environment, against Cognos 11. You can also run things like how will my reports run if I were to switch them to 64-bit DQM mode. It can actually tell you if there's any issues and give you side-by-side comparisons about performance times as well. So pretty nice new features in Lifecycle Manager, which we won't necessarily get into today, but that is part of the tool now, so you'll have it if you do want it. Getting back to just the install, there's, again, the 2 options, the easy and the custom. Easy install really hasn't changed over the different releases, and this was sort of introduced with 10.2.2. They introduced the option of a quick start. And this was for people who, really just wanted to get something up and running really quickly. Maybe they didn't have access to a database for the content store. They didn't have a security provider. It installs all that for you out of the box, configures everything, brings it online. So instead of going with one of the standard, SQL Server, Oracle DB2 content stores, it installs an Informix 12.10 database for you, sets up the content store, configures all that, and it will also provide an Apache directory server that you can use to create some user groups and some user accounts to test out different security and user capabilities that you may want to test out on your desktop or on a sandbox environment. We typically don't recommend running these in a production environment. They're not enterprise grade databases and directory servers. You typically want to stick to the ones that we kind of referenced earlier on the prerequisites, but if you do want to just do some prototyping, want to get up and running quickly, it's a good option. Another thing to note about this is that it will assume, if you're doing this option, that you are a new customer not familiar with Cognos, and there is a switch kind of baked into some of the code that is editable, but it's sort of a pain to get to and to find that will allow you to kind of enable or disable what we call companion legacy tools, the old Cognos 10.8 Studios. Going with the easy option, easy install, disables those by default, so you won't be able to access those if you pick this option. There is a workaround. You can turn them back on, but it assumes that for you when you make that decision. What most of you are probably going to want to do is to do the custom install, which is what you've most likely been doing your whole life if you've been installing Cognos for a while. This will allow you to select individual components that you want. Do you want to have a single server with the gateway, the application tier dispatcher, and the content manager on one? Do you want to distribute those across multiple environments? You pick and choose the pieces that you want. So this is sort of if you're pretty well versed in Cognos installations, this is where you're going to spend most of your time doing the installs. They did try to change the terminology again a bit, so once you decide custom, it's going to ask you, is this the first install, or do you want to expand or connect and install to an existing installation or environment? So the first install essentially is just saying you need to have a content manager present. That's always the first piece of a multi-tier Cognos environment. So in the top right screenshot I have here, you can see that content repository, which is what the new naming in Cognos 11 is for content manager. So they sort of changed these names. Content repository is essentially content manager. It says when you do a first install, we're not going to let that be optional. You have to put it here first, so it's default. It's not an option to check or uncheck. And then from then you could say, do you want the application services, which is essentially application tier, the dispatcher that you've had in the past, and also the optional quote-unquote gateway, which we'll talk about in a little bit as well. So you can start with just a content manager. You can put it all, depending on how you have your organization set up. As long as you do when you do the first install, you'll be asked to pick just the content manager, whatever else you want, and you'll come back again to add on a second server using the connect and install option. And that one, you can see the second screenshot in the bottom left. You can have all 4 options available. So if you want to have failover content managers, content repository, you can put that on a second server. It's optional once you have that initial one set up. And you can, again, add additional dispatchers, gateways. And then there's a 4th option there, which we didn't talk about. It's samples. Again, they kind of baked that in as well. In the past, you had to download a separate samples installation file, extract it, move some files around. It's all kind of built in here as well, which is nice to see. It's nothing extra you have to go out and download. So if you are curious to see some of the new features and capabilities in Cognos 11, they have data modules, they have some sample dashboards, some pretty cool things that you may or may not have had a chance to look at. You can kind of reverse engineer some of those things and figure out how they work. When you do the connect and install, you'll notice that it kind of prompts you for information about your existing URL. Where do you have Cognos currently installed? It'll ask you for an administrator username and password, and this is sort of a new focus on smarter Cognos configuration, setup, and installation. So there really haven't been many changes to the back end for several years installing the server, which in some ways was a good thing. Once you learned it, you didn't really have to mess around with it. You kind of knew exactly how to install and upgrade every version. They're actually trying to make these things easier now, so getting to the concept of a centralized config. So the goal is to eventually have, you do your basic install with the content manager and fill out all the, Cognos configuration screens. Once you have that, it's going to, each additional server you add, it's going to ask to connect to that main content manager, and it's going to get all the information it needs from there. So if you make an update to your main area, it should automatically flow across to all your other servers. So the goal is to kind of make this simple. So, maybe you only have one environment, not a big deal to you, but there are people out there who have 5, 10, 20 servers, and each time they upgrade, they have to go in and set all the different configuration screens over and over and over again. This is kind of focused on those users, making it much more simple and centralized. Another nice thing is that, in the past, when you did an install or upgrade, the first thing you had to do was look for all those different places where it said localhost, change localhost to the server name. You also had to, do some investigation to make sure ports weren't in use. Did the standard ports work? Are they open? Are they being used? It's able to scan and see what ports are open. It'll assign automatically the first available port it finds. Those are both nice features which can save you some time. Another nice feature too is there was a lot of confusion in the past, and it wasn't appropriately sized. It was up until 10.2.2 was Tomcat. Now with 10.2.2 and everything going forward, it's Webster Liberty Profile. I believe, depending on the version you were on, it was defaulting to around 1,000 or so. Sometimes it was 768. Way back it used to be small, medium, large. Now it defaults to 4096. There's not even an option of a 32-bit server anymore. So because we're working strictly with 64-bit servers and 64-bit server software, we're able to use and leverage more memory. So 4096 is now the starting default. You can bump that up, but it's a pretty good starting point, way better than the 1096 they were, or 1024, whatever it was back a couple of versions ago. So bigger Java window to work with just to run reports and have some additional stability. Another feature which kind of refers back to that centralized config is if you move to release 4, you'll now have a new a left pane that's called configuration group, and this is sort of where you can define the groups that will sort of define centralized configuration. Still a bit of a work in progress here. If you worked with a previous release prior to 4, this wasn't there, and there was an additional line called configuration dispatcher or something at the very bottom of your environment tab. There was no documentation around this. No one really knew what it was, and essentially it was the beginnings of what they were trying to build, which is this configuration group. You also may have seen a folder in the installation called Zookeeper. This was trying to keep configuration centralized and sync across the different servers. They've actually decided to move away from Zookeeper, going with a different technology, which I don't have the actual name of. It's some kind of open source tool. But this is where they're heading. They hope to centralize concepts, install and configure from one central server, eliminate having to make changes across all the servers. At some point, you'll be able to, set Java heaps. They'll be able to define interactive and batch servers if you want to dedicate those, kind of all in one place, and schedule things based on timing. So if you want to have all your servers interactive mode, 9 to 5, and once 5 o'clock hits, switch everything to batch mode. You'll be able to do that in one centralized location, which will be really nice. The gateway web server, we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier. Is this optional? At the conference last week, I asked for a show of hands, who in the room does not want single sign-on? And there wasn't a single person who raised their hand. Everybody wants to have single sign-on. No one wants to have to type a username and password in every single time they log into Cognos to run a report. They wanted to just instantly figure out who they are, assign the correct security, and go. So when they say optional, yes, technically it is optional. You can run Cognos without it. No one is running it without it. So you basically need to set this up and configure it. Unfortunately, this has also gotten much more complicated as of today. You may have already messed around with this in your sandbox. So not only do you work with IIS and you go through the server tool to install, because typically it's not installed out of the box. You have to kind of enable it. You also have to add in this application request routing add-in, which gives you a couple options, additional options to IIS if you're working with IIS. And you're going to have to kind of create a bunch of rules to handle reverse proxies and things like that. If you've done installs prior to release 4, you may think you have the right set of rules. These rules have been recently changed and have much more steps now than they did in release 3. The link there at the very bottom can give you, the full setup steps for what you need to do in release 4. There's about 4 or 5 different rules that you're going to have to put in place to handle single sign-on, legacy single sign-on, headers, legacy tools like Event Studio need special rules. There's just a bunch of steps here. And essentially this is because, since Cognos has the mindset today of no report left behind, bring everything over, all your Query Studio and Analysis Studio reports, which really have been deprecated for over 2 years. They just haven't pulled the plug. They still come over, but they're using old technologies, and Cognos 11 is using a lot of newer technologies. So to make all this play nicely together, there's just a lot of configuration and initial setup that has to happen in your web server. So there is hopefully release 5, I'm being told, but until that actually is released, you never know if something's going to make it or not. They are working to get rid of some of these things and simplify it a bit, get back to some of the simplistic installation and configuration steps that they had prior to Cognos 11. So stay tuned for that. We'll hopefully get another one of these updates or something out to you, to kind of let you know what's changed and what's in and what's out. But as of today with release 4, it works fine as long as you follow all the steps. Hopefully we'll see a more simplistic approach, with release 5, release 6 coming down the road. The companion legacy tools. This is a pretty helpful slide, I think, to kind of talk about and see visually, what's changing and what happened. So concept of studios is essentially gone. No more studios. The only things that really are fully baked in and integrated with the new tool is the concept of Report Studio and Workspace Advanced. So Workspace Advanced was essentially just a different, more user-friendly UI that was running in preview mode that ran on top of the Report Studio engine. So if you have reports today, you'll notice that in the far right of a report that you build in one of those tools, you have the icon to open it in either Report Studio or Workspace Advanced, and that's because essentially there's no difference between the two. They're the same. So the concept of those two individual studios has been merged into one that is called Reports or Reporting. And anything you have today in Cognos 10 or earlier, in those formats will come over and will run fully integrated with the new version. You'll be able to take advantage of all the new features and capabilities. Everything else sort of has either been marked for deprecation or, they're just no longer touching it or enhancing it. So Query Studio, Analysis Studio, Cognos Workspace, they will still run today in Cognos 11. They fire off in a new tab or window, but they are announced for deprecation. They've been marked for some time now, so it shouldn't be too shocking to most of you that these are going away. No date as to when that will finally be, but if I would stop developing any content in those studios or tools today, because you're going to have to eventually migrate them or rebuild them at some point. So start focusing all your efforts, if you're not on 11 today. Report Studio, Workspace Advanced. Event Studio, there was a bunch of questions about this at the conference as well. Not going anywhere, not deprecated. However, there's no new user interface. You still have to kind of go through the Cognos 10 interface to create and edit your existing Event Studio. There may be some plans to introduce a new Cognos 11 similar tool that would do what Event Studio does, just because so many people use it and it's such a valuable tool. But as of today, you'll just continue to use Event Studio the way it is, but with the old UI. Metric Studio, the same thing. It's not going away. It's still there, but there may be plans down the road to more tightly integrate it with the Cognos 11 tool. Again, same thing for Microsoft Office. If you're using Cafe or the Office for Microsoft, or Cognos for Microsoft Office, that still works. No changes there. And then the final big one is Cognos Connection. Portal tabs. This was another big talking point at the conference. There are some new features and capabilities coming that will not necessarily be exactly like you have today with portal tabs, but if you've had a chance to look at 4, they introduced the concept of themes and extensions. You can kind of put buttons and different perspectives and landing pages for different users. Unfortunately, with Release 4, you can't map those as an administrator to specific user groups. Hopefully it's in play for Release 5. It may not make it, but I'm hoping to see Release 5. If not Release 5, then Release 6. The ability for an administrator to define custom perspective landing pages for different security groups and define them automatically, where you could have links to specific reports. You can have a standing, starting landing page dashboard, custom landing pages. So there'll be a way to kind of rebuild and redesign the portal tab security method and landing pages that we've had in Cognos 10 and Cognos 8. So as soon as we have more information on that, we'll share that with you. But they are aware of the concern, and many people aren't going to be able to move forward until they address what's going on with portal tabs. So should be hopefully coming soon, if not the end of this year, early Q1. One other thing to note about these, again, we talked about the easy install. It assumes you're a new customer, and there's a so-called switch that enables legacy companion mode, which you can, if you have a question, I can put it in the links as well. There's a way where you can edit this file. We won't talk about it today, but you can enable this. But going with easy install assumes you're new, disables that, so you won't have that other box with the new. You can see in the top right. If you have that legacy switch disabled, you'll just see report, dashboard, data module. Also in Release 4, they added story. There's a story mode now you can use, but you won't see that other. If you do custom assumes you're an existing customer, you know what you're doing. It enables the legacy switch and enables that other option that you see there. And when you click on other, that's when you get the ability to access Analysis Studio, Event Studio, Query Studio, Workspace, drill through definitions, etc. As we talked about before, if you're using Chrome, you won't be able to use all those studios. I think you only see like drill through and maybe Workspace or Event. Definitely not Query Studio, Analysis Studio. So Just make sure if your users need to go out to those tools that they're using the appropriate browser. Some odds and ends, just to kind of throw out there. JDBC drivers, if you're not using DQM, you really should start moving to DQM, and in order to do that, you'll need to use JDBC drivers. It's nice to see someone finally cleaned up some of these locations. You had to kind of either memorize it or look it up every time. Where do I put those JDBC drivers? Oh, it's in the Web Apps P2PD Web Info Library folder. That just made no sense at all. Now it's your installation directory right in the root directory. It's just drivers. You drop your JDBC drivers in there, you restart Cognos, and then you're up and running with JDBC. Very easy and clean. I like that. Uploaded files. There's been some back and forth about this. I think with release 1 and maybe 2, when you uploaded a file, it went to a specific folder that you could set and stored it right on the server. And same thing with, data sets was supposed to work the same way. Now it gets uploaded into the content store. So you upload the file, it sort of creates these Parquet files, and then it uploads those into the content store. When you reference a dashboard or report using one of these files, it actually temporarily pulls it down to make it accessible, and then does some sort of cleanup when you're not using it, keeps it back in the content store. So you need to be aware of that as well. Another nice feature as well is the installation paths. If you had multiple tools on the server, you in the past had to separate, you had C10_64 or C10, which was essentially a directory for 32-bit and a directory for 64-bit. And once you kind of put it in there, you kind of had to edit the CMP files to figure out what was even installed in there and what version it was and what fixed packs you had. Big mess. Now, the default installation paths make a lot more sense. So you're installing the server, you get a folder called Analytics. If you're installing Framework Manager, you get a folder called Model. If you're installing Cube Designer, you get a folder called Designer. A lot cleaner, a lot easier to maintain and manage, especially if you're inheriting, an environment that you weren't there for the install and you don't even know what's set up. Makes it a lot easier to jump right in and figure out, okay, I know exactly what was installed, I know what version we're on, etc. And releases versus fixed packs, another big topic. In the past, with Cognos 10, you wanted to jump to a new version and maybe, it's already been out for several months. You have to go to the Passport site, you download the general release, which came out 6 months ago, then you have to go to a separate site and figure out, okay, what's the latest fixed pack? Okay, there's 5 of them, do I need to install all 5 of them? Just the last one? It was just a lot of confusion, a lot of extra downloading, extra steps, and also, most of them were just what they were called fixed packs. They didn't really provide a lot of new features or functionality. It was just, here's a bunch of bug fixes. In case you're experiencing any issues, put this on and see if it fixes it for you. That's kind of gone away. Now it's more of a release. And releases are a full build, so you don't have to patch anything. Whatever you download today is going to be the latest and greatest. So if you went out there right after this meeting, said I want to get Cognos 11, all thing you can get is Cognos 11 release 4. You couldn't get 3, 2, 1, etc. So you'll always be on the most recent build. And again, upgrading and patching these, you install it directly on top. No more installing in a separate directory and having to do, a concurrent installation or upgrade. Put it right on top. It essentially runs a quick backup on, the majority of files, your system XML, your Cognos configuration, and you're up and running pretty quickly. They are releasing these quarterly. It's probably been a little more rapid this first year just as they are getting up to speed and it's a brand new product. So I wouldn't expect to see 5 or 6 as we had this year, but going forward, I think they are hoping to get these done quarterly. You can kind of see the schedule as to what's happened so far. R4 came out about 4 or 6 weeks ago, and in my opinion, it's been the most stable and best version yet. Like I said earlier, there are a couple of things they're working with the IIS and some load balancing and web server issues that are still being worked out. There are decent workarounds there that you can do, but should be simplified going forward. R5 should be the best one yet, and there's a bunch of new features as well. If any of you had a chance to attend the conference, you could see some of those, which were New features, we'll start with first, Rave 2.0 will be introduced in Release 5, which allows you to have a lot more control over the visualizations, additional properties, settings. A big frustration of mine was I really liked the look of the new visualizations, but you couldn't change the power. You couldn't edit, the text or where the values showed up. You had to either use the visualization customizer tool, or you had to have, some knowledge of JSON coding and go into the actual source file and modify it, and it was just kind of a big mess. So Rev 2.0 hopefully addresses a lot of these issues. I think there's going to be even more enhancements as we continue to move forward, but nice to see a lot more, and I do mean a lot, like 4 or 5 screens worth of properties around your visualizations. Mapbox is another big feature they announced at the conference as well. Really cool mapping features which are way overdue. You'll be able to almost, zoom down to street level. It has built-in zip code all the way up to, state, country, polygons that will be able to be, color-coded based on, the data that you want to show as good or bad or marketing territories. And some really exciting stuff coming even further down the road where you'll be able to use the Mapbox tool on the web and define your own custom regions and groups and actually pick and choose out of 40 layers which ones you want to see, fonts, colors, etc. Really customizable and nice. Another nice feature is the sort of removal of data sets. They're still there, but now you'll be able to actually directly interact with your Framework Manager model in the dashboard. No need to kind of create those data sets, so you'll be able to go right out of the package right into a dashboard. And as far as the back end, I talked about, they're hoping to remove the reverse proxy. They're going to have some built-in load balancing. Part of the issue today is if you have a multi-server environment, you have to set up server farms because not all of the Cognos services are load balanced out of the box as they have been in the past. So they're going to have all that baked back in. No more need for IIS or your web server to do the load balancing for you. So that should be a nice feature as well, and I'm sure there's a lot more features and functionality that we'll be able to talk about once we get more details on that. And that's it for me. I'm going to turn it back over to Jim. Thank you.
Sorry, I had to get myself off mute there. Thanks, Todd. That was a lot of information. You went through it very quickly. Appreciate it. And we have some good questions coming in. Maybe you can take a look at those while I'm going through a few things, and we'll handle a lot of these in the Q&A, although you've covered a lot of the things that are coming up. I want to just take a moment to highlight a couple of special offers from Centaurus that are focused around helping you to move to Cognos Analytics. First of all, for those of you that are in the planning stages of your upgrade, we have 2 options. Both options include a conversion of your Query Studio content to Report Studio, as well as a copy of the Modio PI Pro tool. If you already own the tool, we can unbundle that as part of the offer for you too. The first option involves the conversion and then helping you put together your upgrade strategy, which covers identifying content that needs to be migrated manually, hardware and software dependencies, and specific environmental gotchas, as well as an estimate for the upgrade itself. And the second option involves a conversion of the Query Studio content and then a block of 16 hours from our experts to help you answer questions that might come up, do hardware sizing, whatever you might need in planning for your upgrade, your potential upgrade, and identifying issues. As you can see from Todd's presentation, there's a lot of moving parts. So either one of these options, preparing for Cognos Analytics 11, are at $5,995 fixed price for either of those options. And then the next slide, please. If you folks are at the point where you've done your planning or you're, have really made a decision to move forward with the upgrade, we have a couple of options here. And the first one is our Quick Start package. I saw when we did the survey there was a lot of folks that need to put C11 into a dev environment, and that's exactly what the first offer is we have this quick start package. It involves installing C11 in a dev environment with full documentation of that for you, and that's $4,499 fixed price. And then if you're interested in getting an estimate for Centaurus to help you with your entire upgrade, maybe you have multiple servers, multiple server environment, we just have a short questionnaire. If you just reach out to info@centaurus.com, and we'll get you the questionnaire, you fill that out, and then we'll put together a call to walk you through the tasks that would be involved, and we can, kind of talk, because a lot of times we'll share those with organizations, but we'll just basically go through and help you estimate what it's going to take to do the upgrade and how we can help there. So those are the two offers as it relates to moving to version 11. And then we have a few other resources I'd like to just call out. We could move to the next slide and the slide after that. We have some upcoming events. We're going to join, if you are going to be at the Tableau TC16 conference next week in Austin, we would love to meet you there. If you go to our events page, you can register for a couple of receptions that we're going to have during the event. And then on Thursday, November 17th, we're going to be providing a demonstration of our Centaurus Enterprise Analytics connector with a focus on leveraging Cognos as a data source for Tableau. That's one of our next events that's coming up. And the next slide, related to Cognos Analytics, we've had a number of great webinars already this year on different topics, and this is a set of different resources talking about preparing for Cognos Analytics 11, focusing on the new report authoring capabilities in Cognos Analytics, and a great one called Taking a Closer Look, where we got into more of a detailed demo about some of the dashboarding capabilities, the newer parts that Todd mentioned of Cognos 11. And with that, we'd like to jump over to Q&A. So hopefully, Todd, you've got a chance to see some of the things coming in there. And
I did. So there's some ones that I just first saw here. A couple questions about Esri maps. I did have questions about this myself when they announced that Pitney Bowes will now be doing the the mapping data for Cognos 11 going forward using the Mapbox cloud-based technology. So I don't really know where that leaves Esri. It sounds like they're a bit upset with the way they kind of got handled, because that was sort of the only real mapping option you had in the past. So they were at the conference. I wasn't able to attend that event, but I know that they're still somehow involved, and I think they should still be supported. But going forward, you'll get free, out of the box. You don't have to install or sign up for anything. Access to all the Pitney Bowes boundary files, which include zip code level. And some data sets, apparently they have hundreds of different data sets, anywhere from census to where kindergarten schools are located on maps. Some will be included. A lot of them will be an add-on that you'll have to purchase through Pitney Bowes, but again, a lot more than you have or ever had in Cognos. It should be best of breed mapping once it's released in R5 and expanded in R6. So as soon as I hear what the deal with Esri is, I'll be sure to share that as well. Another question someone asked about: does Cognos 11 still support CQM compatible query mode 32-bit? Yes, absolutely. All your content will come over if you're 100% CQM, which a lot of people are. No issue running that, but the wording I kept hearing over and over at the conference was, we no longer invest any time or money. Cognos is no longer investing any time or money into supporting 32-bit CQM. Everything is dynamic query mode. So no date as to when you need to 100% be off it, but it's coming, and it's very easy now. Like I mentioned earlier with Lifecycle Manager, there's a checkbox when you're running some benchmarking or validations to say, show me what this looks like with DQM. Obviously, you have to have a JDBC driver and that connection set up, but it'll actually rerun all your reports. It can show you if it actually performs quicker. You may save some performance time switching to that. You may not. It'll also tell you if there's any issues, reports fail, you can investigate. So good time to take a look at that and see, if there's anything holding you back, and if not, it's all you really have to do is just set up the JDBC, republish your packages, and do some testing, and you should be able to kind of convert onto DQM. Let's see. Someone asked about Lifecycle Manager. Yes, you can connect to 10.2.2, and that's sort of the point. I think it goes back even further. It goes back possibly to 8.3, I want to say. So if you're on 10, no worries. If you're still on 8, as long as you're, I think, on the end of 8.4, 8.3, I think it even supports that. I have to double check those numbers, but yeah, the point is, it's redone for Cognos 11, new user interface, and you'll essentially point, a source and a target. So your source will be whatever you're currently on today. Your target will be the new Cognos 11 install you bring online, and it's going to go ahead and validate, a report, for example, first in the source, then in the target. It's going to run it in the source, run it in the target, and then it'll do an overlay comparison for you, and you can even get into more details with that. I mean, it was pixel perfect in the past. You may have used it, and you got a lot of failures because a pixel had moved, or if you had the date modified, run report date in the bottom. Obviously, when you're running the samples, the times aren't going to match, so it would flag everything as a fail. Didn't really help you, automate it so much. So now there's options to ignore the date, ignore pixel perfect, and focus more on the data and the layout. So yeah, you can use it with anything from somewhere late in 8.3, 8.4, all the way up to 10, and compare that and contrast it and see how it validates with Cognos 11. Let's see, what else do we have? Any changes to Framework Manager? I haven't seen any changes to Framework Manager. Definitely not going away. There is a FM 11.0.4, but nothing new really jumping out in Framework Manager. The new web-based modeling is definitely not a replacement. They've stressed that very adamantly, that they're not going to ever pull the plug on Framework Manager. It's sort of a staple of Cognos, but there are new technologies with data sets, data modules to kind of model things, and blend data from uploaded files and tables, but nothing really exciting or new on the Framework Manager side. And same thing with Transformer, no changes there. In fact, if you're going to use Transformer in Cognos 11, it's still 10.2.2. There isn't a Transformer 11 today. Another question, yes, you can use CQM. Question about PowerPlay. Yes, you can use PowerPlay. I believe you download today PowerPlay 10.2.2. You have to put FixPack 5 on top of that, and you install it in an adjacent directory next to your Cognos 11 server, and you can leverage PowerPlay Studio, in that companion area that we looked at earlier. You can use PowerPlay. There was a mention, again, nothing, they're never going to commit to this in writing as of today, but there was talk about they may be actually building a new PowerPlay for 11, just due to the huge fan base and user base they have for PowerPlay. Looks like they're finally starting to come around and maybe offer a new tool that does what PowerPlay does today. So that would be exciting. But if you do want to take advantage of PowerPlay, and you still have licenses for that, there is a way to get that up and running. Oops. Let's see. Transformer, yes, still works. Again, it's 10.2.2 Transformer. No issue on deprecating Transformer. I think there's just too many people still using Power Cubes. Yeah, you can bring your Transformer cubes over. You don't have to move to dynamic cubes. Someone asked about how Transformer is different than Cube Designer. Transformer is going to build Power Cubes, which are a physical MDC file where all the aggregations are just sort of stored in a file, which has been around for a long time. Starting to kind of get a little long in the tooth just due to the amount of data that people have today. It's somewhat capped at 2 gig, so depending on how you partition that, you can kind of break it across multiple files. You kind of have to get pretty creative at some point with how you're going to handle large cubes. Dynamic cubes, which use the cube designer tool to build, are different technology that's in memory. You sort of pre-aggregate stuff into the actual RAM on the server. So as long as you have RAM, which is pretty cheap these days, the sky's the limit. You can load in 20 years of data. You don't have to kind of cherry pick 1 or 2 years and have a historical cube. So it's sort of the next breed of OLAP technology that Cognos has. So that's the difference between those two. Someone asked, is Cognos 11 a stable version, or should we wait? It depends on your organization's needs. I do feel that release 4 is finally a stable version. That said, if you have a ton of servers and you're doing a lot of load balancing, you have a lot of gateways that you have multiple gateways and possibly an F5 load balancer, a pretty complex organization. You may want to wait till they simplify some of the things in release 5. But there's workarounds today that aren't too difficult to set up as long as you know what you're doing, and it has been much more stable. So if you've had a bad experience with release 2 or 3 where it just became unresponsive or buttons didn't work or sessions were timing out, a lot of those issues have been resolved in release 4, and with release 5 being right around the corner, I expect it to get even better, and again with some of the back-end changes more simplified. So I do feel that it's at a good point now and just going to continue to get better from here on out. Someone asked about dashboarding and active reports. Those are not going anywhere. Active reports are still a big part. Dashboarding, I don't have time today, but I'm sure we'll probably have a session coming up on dashboarding. There's some good videos on YouTube as well about what you can do with the dashboarding tool. Lots of development being put into that tool, and each version seems to offer more and more features and functionality, so keep an eye on that. Let's see what else. Custom Java code, that's a good question. When you bring over your content today, everything you bring over, assuming you're an existing customer migrating content, in order to make things run smoothly after the migration, they didn't want to change any of the reports. So there's the concept of interactive mode, viewer in Cognos 11. And what this does is it gives you that new context bar in the viewer that lets you filter and sort and swap rows and columns, and you can turn a crosstab into a chart and vice versa. It gives your users, which in the past, basically had no options other than drilling up and down if you had a multi-dimensional source and then exporting to, Excel PDF. A lot more functionality and features, right out of the box, baked into the viewer when interactive mode is set to true. So by default, when you first do your migration, everything is set to false. You have to manually change on a report-by-report basis it to true. Setting that to true currently also disables any JavaScript code that you have in there. So if you put in JavaScript code to edit the prompts, to hide or show things based on a selection, things that just weren't possible with the standard prompt interface in the past, you have to pick and choose. So it will continue to run as long as interactive mode is false. If you want to use it, interactive mode, then you're going to have to lose that JavaScript and deal with that. So it's sort of a case-by-case basis per report. There is, with release 4, and I haven't had the chance to look at the documentation or dig into it, but there is the ability to centralize your JavaScript now as a JavaScript API. So instead of having to cut and paste code snippets all over your Report Studio reports like you had in the past, there's a new object in the toolbar that the name is escaping me, but essentially it's an include statement almost. You would say, I want to include this JavaScript code that's stored on the server. Here's where it is. Here's the name of it. And then you can leverage all the functions and features in there. And it really opens up the whole JavaScript world. I'm looking forward to seeing, what can be done, but taking advantage of, jQuery and Ajax and some of these newer JavaScript technologies that you see in web pages today when you're out there, as far as, prompt validation and animation and some pretty slick things. So, once I get my hands on some of that information and some of the things you can do, I'd like to do a presentation on that at some point as well. No changes to the SDK as far as what you've built so far. I think new features to leverage the SDK haven't been released yet, so Like I said, anything you bring over today, any SDK that you have will continue to run. I don't think there's an SDK yet that lets you leverage like the new dashboarding tool or any of the new features. So that is definitely coming. I don't have a date, but anything that you've built so far with the SDK will continue to function. No changes there. What else do we have? Licensing. I don't think there's been any changes to that since it moved to 11, assuming you went to the more simplified, analytics user ones, where they got away from consumers and professional authors. All that stuff kind of went away last year, so you may have, grandfathered in a couple of those, but, with the new licensing structure, essentially, all your users get all the studios, and since all the studios now, don't exist or they've merged into one, it's sort of a one-stop shop. You either get access to it, or you're, an admin, a modeler, et cetera, at a higher level, but much more simplistic licensing.
Hey, Todd, there's a question about the estimate on the work needed to rebuild Query Studio Analysis Studio reports to the new design tool. So could you just speak to we obviously have a plugin that we've built with Modio that's part of our offering. Maybe
Right.
you could just speak that gets all the Query Studio stuff over and that helps them get, see where all that other content is. So it's very valuable. Maybe you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can today in 10.2.2, or if you're on Cognos 11, out of the box, fully integrated the tool. There's, if you go to the properties of a Query Studio report, there's an option to open in Report Studio. I think in Cognos 11 it's called Convert to Report or something like that. And that will just leverage Cognos itself, and it takes the code of Query Studio and converts it into a Report Studio spec. So if you want to see how it looks, you can do that today. It's, like I said, it's out of the box functionality. The issue is with, how many Query Studio reports do you have? I mean, it may take just a couple seconds to do one, but do you have, hundreds or even thousands of Query Studio reports that you need to convert? And then taking it a step further, do you have any types of jobs or schedules or, any events or things like that that are referencing that object ID that, is essentially at one point Query Studio, but once you convert it to Report Studio, it's a new object ID and a new file. So very, very time consuming manually, obviously, if you're going to do that. With the Modio PI plugin, you can, just grab an entire, public folder or, even my folders if you want, and just say convert everything, find everything first, validate it, and then convert it. It'll back it up for you. It'll run essentially that baked in, like conversion tool that Cognos does. It just runs it in a batch mode and cranks through it really quickly. So if you are a big Query Studio shop and you have a lot of stuff that you want to convert, it may make sense and be cost effective to look at that as an option. And not only do you get that tool, you get Modio PI Pro for a full year, which if you haven't had a chance to look at is great. Another nice feature that's baked in the Modio PI Pro is the ability to kind of batch flip that interactive mode switch. So as we talked about earlier with the JavaScript question, everything you bring over today defaults to interactive mode false. You have to set that at a report by report level. So you open the report, you go into the properties, you find that setting, you hit a drop down and say, change it from false to true, save the report, and then repeat times 1,000 or however many reports you have. It's very time consuming, especially if it's a no-brainer. You don't have JavaScript or something holding you back. With Modio PI Pro, there's a tool, and one of the panes is called like the customizer, template customizer, something like that. You can pick you build a sample report where you have, that setting set to true. You set that as, the source that you want to push out and that line item from the properties, and it'll distribute that property across the entire, my folders, public folders, etc. And you can flip everything on in one button, and saves you a ton of time. So, if you don't need the Query Studio tool, it's still worth looking at Modio PI Pro. If you need the Query Studio tool, it's great because you get both, and they're I'd say must-haves for large content migrations coming over from 10 to 11. Someone asked these questions. We post the yes poll. We'll answer all the questions and then post the responses. In a
One
reasonable amount of time.
last question, Todd, is just people were asking about the stability of the release. What are our thoughts, with the latest release? And
Yeah, I was saying before, I think it's definitely much more stable now than it has been in the past, and I give it a pretty good review now that it is able to be put into a production environment, and we have a couple customers who have done that, and there's been growing pains with early releases, but now people are definitely saying it works much better, it's stable, no more more crashing, no more unresponsiveness, so definitely stable. You can move forward with it now if you've been on the fence, or if you haven't had a chance to check it out. Definitely give it another chance and kick the tires a bit and see how it looks for you. That said, there are changes coming in the architecture, like the load balancing will be built in more. Some of the gateway IIS settings are going to be changing again, but there are very adequate workarounds today that will get you where you need to be if you want to jump today. But if you do have time, you can wait for release 5, release 6. I think everything should be on the up and up from here on out.
All right. Well, I hope this has been valuable to the folks on the line today. We're at the end of our time. We want to be conscious of that. Please, you can continue to send us questions in the chat window. We're going to address all of those and put a document up because we had so many. We had a big group today and a lot of lively questions being fired off here. But please do think of us if you need some help either planning for your Cognos Analytics upgrade or for actually doing the work. Todd and his team, that's all they do. They focus on it, and we would love to help you. So thanks again so much, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the next Centaurus broadcast.